So I talked about how the gut is related to the brain, believe it or not. Now, when the gut microbiome is really healthy and balanced and diverse, it communicates with the brain via what we call the vagus nerve. And this helps control actually our mood, our memory, and just our general cognition. So when the gut microbiome is out of balance, we start to lose some of those functions. And this can cause a variety of problems like depression, anxiety, poor memory, poor learning skills. Also, we have these neurotransmitters that are made in the gut. So I call these the calm and happy hormones, or serotonin and GABA. And so these are made in the gut by the microbes and also specialized cells. And we can call these hormones or neurotransmitters, but about 95% of serotonin actually comes from the gut, even though we associate it with a brain kind of thing. So when the microbiome is out of balance, those hormones or neurotransmitters, they're deficient. And so that's why we get these mood disorders like anxiety, depression, and we know that those are pretty common in much older adults. And it's the microbiome connection. Now, conversely, having a low mood or being depressed for whatever reason or stress, this can impact the microbiome. So if you're experiencing a lot of long-term stress and you're lonely, having anxiety or sadness, that contributes to gut dysbiosis and makes the problem even worse. Now the gut immune connection. So it's really incredible to think that 80% of our immune cells are actually in the gut. So when the microbiome is out of balance for any reason, it can really seriously impact immune cell activity. A typical lifetime of exposure to toxins such as glyphosate, which is Roundup, which is in GMO foods, processed food additives like emulsifiers, high fructose corn syrup, and also plasticizers, which are simply things that are made of plastic. These break down the mucosal barrier as well, and they damage the microbiome. So like I said, they should be stacked like bricks. We start to get gaps and we get leaky gut. Now, the longer we live, the more of those things are happening to us and the more toxins we're exposed to. So there's this cumulative damage that causes leaky gut. Now, the other problem with leaky gut is that it allows oxygen to come in where it really shouldn't be. And that feeds these pathogens and bacteria, and it damages the good bacteria. So without that good tight barrier junction, we are going to have larger compounds that can come into the system, into our bloodstream, and trigger inflammation and just generally overactivate the immune system. So this explains why, as we age, there's this natural diminishing of immune activity, which is kind of beyond our control, and that's called immunosenescence, or low immune system. Now, immunosenescence could be compared to like an oak tree in the forest. Now, in its prime, the oak tree was very sturdy and impervious to whatever elements hit it. It's really strong, it provides shelter for surrounding creatures. But when the tree gets really, really old, its bark starts to crack and weaken, the leaves become a little bit aged, and the branches are not as strong, and eventually it's more susceptible to outside threats such as mold and disease and pests that could kill the tree. Now, our bodies become increasingly sensitive to these foreign invaders also. And that's because we have this increase in inflammatory responses caused by this accumulation of built up damage, just like the tree. Now, this can cause the body's defenses to weaken further over time, making older adults more prone to infection. They can also have more inflammation, which leads to this whole host of other age-related diseases. Now, an older adult is more likely to have a compromised immune system and a compromised microbiome. So there's definitely this increased risk of having just something like a common simple cold transform into something much more serious like pneumonia, where they have to go to the hospital. So keeping that gut healthy is really critical at every age because it helps support a really good hardy immune system and makes the body more resilient so we can cope with all these daily stresses and toxins and pathogens. Now let's talk a little more about leaky gut and inflammation. So when the gut microbiome is out of balance or dysbiosis, these bad bacteria or pathogens, they can come in and set up shop, and they also cause leaky gut because of the inflammation. So under these conditions, things like toxins and larger compounds that normally couldn't go through the gut barrier are able to penetrate the gut barrier and cause all this inflammation. We call these cytokines or inflammatory cytokines, and they're just chemical messengers that will spread inflammation all throughout our body. So age-related chronic inflammation is known as inflammaging. So inflammation and aging, inflammaging. And this is believed to be at the root of many of those hallmarks of aging that I talked about. So inflammaging is really good to describe the role of inflammation in these common chronic illnesses that are related to age, like arthritis, type 2 diabetes, atherosclerosis, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and osteoporosis, bone loss, all related back to inflammaging. We know that inflammation is very hard on our joints. So as we get older, our joints just start to break down and cause us pain and also inflammation. And in the worst case, some people are disabled from this, or they need major surgery or joint replacement. So osteoarthritis, which is an arthritis of specific joints, usually due to overuse, is at the root of the joint degeneration. And that's impacting at least 10% of American adults. We don't really have any good medicines for this. We don't have anything that prevents the joint degeneration. And then for treating the pain, we have opioids and NSAIDs, and we know all about those. So we really want to avoid those. Other factors are being overweight, getting injured, even just certain genetics can predispose a person to osteoarthritis. But in the end, it's that inflammation that is at the root of all of this. Now, science is finally starting to explore the root causes of OA, and we're trying to find a more suitable treatment instead of those addictive pain medications. So researchers are starting to draw this very strong link between the OA and the inflammaging, and they're realizing that this microbiome is playing a big role in this. So there's one research study that I know of that shows us that animals were fed a high sugar, high fat diet, and that induces inflammation. And these animals gained weight, and they had increased cartilage damage as a result. Now, in a human study, the diagnosis of osteoarthritis was linked to having high levels of these inflammatory bacteria in their microbiome, or the bad bacteria. So that just shows us this link between the gut and joint health. Now, remember, osteoarthritis isn't just reserved for older adults. You can have a joint injury at any age, you can be overweight, and all of this is going to contribute to even more inflammation. And then having excess weight, of course, is putting extra stress on the weight-bearing joints, and so you have a higher risk of having osteoarthritis.